Hi there, it's your girl Nada Cherry here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If it's your first time tuning in, you are welcome. And where have you been? If you haven't yet subscribed, please do subscribe. Hit the notification button so that when I upload a new video, you will be among the MVPs. I mean, the MVPs knows this, right? You do, right? I really appreciate you. And please remember to like, to share as to many people as you can, and comment. I mean, when I see you commenting, it really shows that, okay, there are people watching, there are people listening to what I am saying, and we are conversing, right? And I will also be learning because I mean, this channel, every moment is a learning one. All right, without taking much of your time, I feel so excited today because one, I want to give a shout out to Salim. Hi, Salim. Oh my, I do remember your name. Salim is one of the Uber guys that was driving me from where I was coming from to get to home, right? I hope I said it right. Yeah, so we had a discussion, and I think this is not new to me because I always have a discussion with the Uber guy, and whereby I'll be sharing my faith and they'll be sharing their own or what they think about it. And so now it so happened that Salim is a Muslim guy and I'm a Christian. And first things first, I would like to say thank you, Salim, because he was so nice. Um, yeah, he was quite nice. And I know that maybe my faith is different from his. And this is why we're having this video because of the discussion that we had. I mean, I shared to whatever little knowledge that I know and believe of my faith to him. And he also shared. And then I was like, you know what? I would like to put this on my YouTube channel. And this is why you're going to have a listening in with on our discussion. But then also, I am so grateful and thankful and excited because a dear friend, I mean, he's a friend that has changed to become family, right? Douglas, I am so thankful that you accepted to do this. I mean, you've been in this ministry for some time now, and I know that you wouldn't just like whip up your phone and start doing it, but you've been doing great things, and I really appreciate God to have not only meet you, but also to listen to your sermons, to listen to your teachings and guidance that you give. And I hope that now my people, the MVPs and the people that are tuning in, will be able to listen in and learn something. And if you have any questions and if you need another talk on this, kindly comment, and then we'll see how we can arrange with Brother Douglas to come and do this. But otherwise, I'm so grateful and I hope that you will learn something here today. Otherwise, let's get to it. Remember to sparkle in love with a dash of kindness. So we can have that conversation again. So my question was, you said Muslims believe that Jesus was a prophet.
Yes.
He cannot be God because he was born and then he died.
Yes.
But yet again, you believe that Jesus is going to come again.
Yes.
Also, again, as a prophet
As
to
a
come and
prophet.
finish up his job.
Yes.
So, can you explain that so that we can understand?
Okay. I'm not like a. How can I say? I'm gonna say this, ne?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I did read the book, but I cannot say like as a prof, like a sheikh, like sheikh what it means, ne?
No, not really.
That like the. I don't know how to say in English. But okay, I'm gonna just explain this because that is what I read and what also like we heard about our readers, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't want to go into something that I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna say this as like straight the way
Yeah.
I did heard and the way I did read some books also.
Okay.
Okay, I think this we believe that Jesus he was a prophet, he wasn't a god, and he
Yeah.
wasn't a son of God. That's as Muslim we believe, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so the thing is, and we believe also, like I said before, that Jesus is gonna come.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you guys are Christian. You believe that Jesus died on the cross, right?
Yes.
But as Muslims, we don't believe that.
Okay.
We believe that Jesus is taken by God alive, not like he died by the cross. No, the person that he died by the cross, it wasn't Jesus. That's the only thing that sometimes they maybe Christian they like we have like fight. No, he did die, but as we are Muslims, we believe that Jesus he was taken by God alive, not dead.
Okay, so when you say Jesus was taken alive,
Yeah.
because we Christians, as we believe that Jesus died on the cross, right?
Yeah,
We know that after he died on a Friday, Saturday, which as we call it as a Sabbath, he rested, and then on the third day he rose again, and which we understand that after that he ascended, he went to heaven, and yes, he was alive. But now, are you saying that it was a different Jesus that was crucified, and then it was a different Jesus that went to heaven?
Yes, because the person he was there, the one who crucified, what do you call in
Yes.
English? Yeah, the
Yeah.
one who put there by the cross.
Yeah, the one was
It
crucified.
wasn't Jesus.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like someone else, not Jesus.
Okay.
Yeah, so that time like God was taking Jesus to go to like heaven. He was alive. He wasn't dead. Like the way
Yes.
like there's some books that you write down that Jesus died. No, Jesus never died. And also we believe that when he come, he's gonna get married.
Is that so?
That's true.
Okay, so now in the Bible as Christians,
Yeah.
we believe that his bride is the church,
Oh no.
not as a person.
And also that is my first time to hear about that. Because I
Okay.
never heard about that.
Have you had any chance to like read the Bible?
Yeah, I read some, but long time. But I read that time was like in my school of
Okay.
the Muslim. That time, yeah, but that is long time.
Okay.
Yeah, so I cannot mention it's like some Bible things like verses, you know.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
do
but long
understand.
time I used to like read. Yeah, because I was reading Quran and I was our books. If I go there, maybe it's gonna be like struggle for me to explain. Yeah, so I don't want to make like other people confused.
Okay.
Yeah, so like let me cut from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, otherwise, thank you so much for your time. It's good to hear your views. And I mean, like I said, it was not to come and start off judging you, but it's just to come and see and learn your religion, and then how we can also maybe even explain it. Like I explained that I've got a YouTube channel, and that's where I'm gonna go and explain further on it. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, sure.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Greet everyone. Hi everyone. Thank you for joining. We have a question that we seek to answer in this short discussion. And the question that I would want to ask so that we have an idea of where we are going is how does the Christians and the Muslims, where do they join hands? Where do they meet? Who is who in this whole story? Now, I want us to realize that we seem to understand from history and also biblical history that Israelites and Ishmaelites are sort of two groups, completely different, yet coming from one root, which is Abraham. So I'm going to try to trace a little bit history concerning Abraham and try to come to how it affects us today, so that in that picture we might try to find out who is who. So you would understand that there's a story that concerns Abraham. The story of the two sons, you'd realize that God promised Abraham a seed through whom the seed will come into the world. So through this seed that God promises Abraham, you realize that all the nations were going to be blessed through this seed that Abraham is promised. And as a sign to show that this seed was going to be given to Abraham, God actually gives Abraham a promise. And then he says, as evidence that I'm giving you a seed, I will give you a land. So in the book of Genesis chapter 17, you find God giving Abraham the land, and after the promise of the seed. So now the story goes that Abraham, while he's waiting for the seed, he understood that God was going to bring a seed. When you go to the book of John chapter 8 verse 56, I think, let me just read that one quickly, so that we really have a clear understanding as to where we are going, so that everybody is on the same page. All right, John chapter 8, verse 56, it says here, Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and he was glad. So this is Jesus speaking to the Jews of his time. So he says, your father Abraham, he rejoiced to see my day, and when he saw it, he was glad. When did Abraham see this day? Abraham saw Christ's day in the promise that God comes to him and gives him concerning the seed. So the seed that God is promising Abraham, let us realize that at this point, Abraham is of age, is very old. The wife also, Sarah, is very old. We can see it from chapter 16 of the book of Genesis, verses 1, verses 2, verses 3. Sarah actually admits that, you know what, God has closed my womb. I am barren. I cannot bear children. Because you'd realize that Sarah at this point, she's way, way old. Now, with the promise of the seed, Abraham understood that this seed was concerning the coming of the seed through whom the whole world was going to be blessed. That is according to Genesis chapter 22 and verse 18. So, with this seed, chapter 17 of the book of Genesis, you would understand that through this seed that God is promising Abraham, the whole world was going to be reconciled to God. And then Abraham understood this whole seed thing, that it had nothing to do with only one child. Because remember, God asked Abraham to say, look at the stars. Can you count them? This is exactly how your seed shall be, as the stars of the sky and also as the sand of the sea in number. So time passes after the promise of the seed, and then Abraham gets tired of waiting. Sarah, now realizing that she is of age, she can't really bear children, and God's promises out of Abraham's bowels is the seed going to be given. So she comes and she says to Abraham, please take Hagar, my servant. And I want us to realize that this Hagar that comes into the picture, number one, she's coming into the picture. Important thing, Sarah doubts the promise that God has given, that he was going to provide a seed for them. And number two, Abraham also buys into this doubt, and he leaves his position and joins with Sarah in doubt, and they take Hagar and they make a child through Hagar. And this child, they named him Ishmael. Now, when Ishmael is of age, is growing up, God actually says to Abraham, he comes to Abraham and says, you know what, this Ishmael that you have given or that you have made is a child of your own works. I promised a seed and I'm here to fulfill this promise that I made to you. So this time now, Sarah really believes that, you know what, God is going to fulfill the word that he has promised. So Sarah gets a child and they name him Isaac according to the promise of the Lord. But I want us to realize that this is not a story only about Ishmael and Isaac. It's a whole prophetic story behind this. God actually allows this story to be in the Bible so that we learn a huge picture about it. Because you'd realize in the book of Galatians chapter 4, Paul speaks of two covenants. The first covenant, Haggai, which is the Mount Sinai covenant, which bears children to bondage, and the second covenant. So you'd realize that the life of Abraham, really, it's not really just the two sons, the Ishmael and Isaac. And then I want us to also look at this aspect. Let's just bring Haggai again into the picture, just a little bit information about it. You know, the Bible really speaks that Haggai was a slave. The conditions through which she becomes a slave to Abraham and Sarah, you know, it's not really clear in the Bible, but the Bible history is a whole narration on how people got to become slaves. But the important thing is, Haggai gets a child while she is a slave, and really by this time she's not redeemed, she's a slave. The Bible just says she was a slave of Sarah. And she gets a child. When she gets this child, at some point when Sarah had her own child, she's not happy with Haggai and Ishmael. complains to Abraham. Abraham comes to God. God goes to him and he says, you know what? Chase them away. Listen to Sarah, your wife. Because Ishmael is not the child of the promise. Now, the whole picture that I want us to realize in this is God is actually presenting a story about salvation through these two sons of Abraham. Now, all right, I want us to go a little bit into Galatians chapter 4 to explain that. All right. Now, you would understand Galatians chapter 4 and verse 29. Galatians chapter 4, verse 29. I think this, I have to read it also, so that all right, here we are. Chapter 4 and verse 29. So, verse 29, it says, but as then he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the spirit, even so it is now. Verse 28 actually says, now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of the promise. But as he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the spirit, even so it is now. Now you would realize that Galatians brings in a new picture about the whole story, maybe the background as to why Ishmael and Hagar, the mother, were chased away. Galatians actually says Ishmael was persecuting Isaac, which means they were causing problems around the home setup. And I want us to realize that Abraham, when he's being promised a seed, God actually says, or he involves a certain important aspect around the whole seed issue. The first thing is, God was going to give Abraham a land. This land was supposed to be a token or evidence of God fulfilling the promise of the seed. And at the second time, I want us to realize that Abraham and Sarah, they were old beyond an age of bearing a child, yet God promises them a seed. It means this seed that they were being promised is purely a miracle of God. God was supposed to provide the seed himself, not any way that Abraham was ever going to think about. And I want us to realize also that there was no way in the capacity of Sarah to provide a seed for herself, because remember, all these years she had failed to conceive. And now, when Abraham gets a child, it's God providing the seed. It's God providing the land. Everything is God. Now, I want us to put Ishmael in this whole sense. Ishmael represents, or let me start with Isaac. Isaac represents God's capacity to provide a seed. Remember, this seed, John said this seed was Christ himself. So when we look at Isaac, the child of the promise, we're not really looking at Isaac, the child of the promise, because remember, God is providing, or he's fulfilling the promise that he had made earlier on in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 3. The whole story is not really about Isaac and Ishmael. The background or the root story is God providing the seed. Remember in the book of Genesis when Adam and Eve had sinned, God says to the woman, you shall bear children in pain. And he goes on to say, your seed shall crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent shall bruise thy heel. So you would understand that when God comes to Abraham now, he's here to fulfill the promise he had made in the book of Genesis, the earlier chapters, chapter 3 specifically. So which seed was this? You would understand that when you put John's aspect into the whole thing, into the whole story, you'd understand that the seed that is being spoken of here in the promise to Abraham is Jesus Christ himself. How is it Jesus Christ? When you trace the whole genealogy of Jesus Christ in the book of Matthew, in the book of Luke, you'd understand it's traced Abraham, Isaac, and all the other males that come, and it ends in Jesus Christ. So God was saying, I have now come to fulfill the promise I had made back in the book of Genesis. Which promise? The promise of the coming of the seed. Remember, Romans chapter 3 explains that we are all sinners, fallen short of the grace of God. So to Abraham, God is now fulfilling what he had said in chapter 3 of the book of Genesis, which is the provision of the seed that is there to crush the head of the serpent. And chapter 12 of the book of Revelation, verse 9, it says that this serpent is actually Satan, it's actually the devil himself. So God was now here to fulfill the promise of a seed who is going to crush the head of the serpent, who is going to crush the devil, who is going to conquer sin once and for all. So now let's recap a little bit. You will understand that God is saying, I will provide the seed. In this aspect, it's Isaac. But through Isaac, God was going to provide a seed who is going to be victorious, crush the head of the serpent, who is Christ. God was going to provide the seed. It had to be a miracle himself. God was going to provide the land. And remember, the land in this picture, it's the Canaan that Abraham was given. But in the greater scope, you'd understand that this land actually represents Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, the kingdom that God built with his own hand, as Paul speaks about it in the book of Hebrews. So the land issue, God provided the land himself. God provided the seed. It is God who is able to provide all of these things. It has nothing to do with Abraham. Now let's put Ishmael in this whole picture. You know, Abraham doubts, so did Sarah. They join in this doubt thing, and then Ishmael comes. When Ishmael comes, they say, we have done what we can to make sure that the seed issue is solved. But I want us to understand that at the core of this story, Abraham making Ishmael, it's as equally as saying he of his own works is capable to provide a seed. He is capable with his own works to prove himself righteous unto salvation, which God comes and says it can't be, because you realize that Abraham cries in the book of Genesis, chapter 22, when they chase Hagar and Ishmael. And then Abraham says to God, oh, that Ishmael may dwell before you forever. And then God doesn't really answer this. He says, I have promised you a seed. I will fulfill the seed issue to you. So that means his works, and remember Galatians is saying Ishmael is a son of the flesh. Now when you put that into context, you realize that the whole marriage of Hagar to Abraham, if so we might call it a marriage, but which it is not really a marriage, right? Because Abraham had a wife, Sarah. One man, one wife, right? So this thing with Hagar, already we have pointed it out that it's adultery on its own. And second of all, Hagar is not really a free woman even if she was supposed to have a child. I mean, she's a born servant, she's a slave. Which means the child that she brings also is not really a free child, it's a slave child, because the mother is a what? Is a slave. So, in this whole funny thing that they try to, bring out, God is actually speaking a different message in this whole context. That the seed he is supposed to provide. The seed, he alone is the one that provides, and for the proof of the presence of the seed, the land, God alone can give that land on his own. So Ishmael represents the ability of Abraham to provide the seed, which we see God disapproves, because it doesn't work that way. So we have this whole generation, because you realize Genesis chapter 22 traces also the genealogies. It's chapter 22, yes. Traces the genealogy of the descendants of Ishmael. Ishmael went on to have his own kids or children. 12 of them, they made generations and generations and generations. As the same way Isaac did, and he had also generations and generations. Now, I want us to realize that Ishmael, the one born of, after the flesh, he was a son of a bondwoman or a slave woman, and therefore he was also a slave. due to that. In contrast, we also notice that Isaac, the one born of the Spirit, he was an offspring of a free woman, so he was a what? A free child that we find in Galatians chapter 4, verse 22. This one, I think, let's just jump onto it. Galatians chapter 4 and verse 22. It says here, "For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondwoman and the other by a free woman. But he who was of a bondwoman was born after the flesh, but he who was of the free woman was by promise." So now we would realize that because Ishmael was a slave, he had no right to an inheritance of what God had promised to Abraham, the land, remember? And on the other hand, Isaac had the right to inherit the land that God had promised to Abraham because he belonged to Abraham's wife Sarah and he was of a free woman. Galatians chapter 4 verse 30, I think let's just jump onto it. Chapter 4 verse 30, it says here, "Nevertheless, what says the scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman." Now remember, we spoke about a conflict between Ishmael and Isaac earlier on. Now, the real issue here that caused this whole conflict, it was the land issue or it was the inheritance issue. Not only the land, I mean, Abraham had a lot of wealth. Remember that time when he was coming from the war of the kings, when he met with Melchizedek, and he offered a tenth of everything that he had gotten out of the war, the spoils of victory. So he realized he had wealth, he had great possession with him. So all of this counted to the inheritance because it needed a name or somebody who would look after it, who would inherit it, who would own it after Abraham. And now the Bible is saying Ishmael, though he was the first child that Abraham had, he is not really the first child of the promise, or he's not the child of the promise. So he had no right to inherit. Grounds being he is a child of the bond servant or is a child of a slave. So he has no right to inherit in this whole thing. And remember, before you start saying, Abraham was a very ruthless man, as many humanists of our current world would say, this issue is deeper than the surface stories that is happening around them. So I just want us to get a clear picture of the story, the ABC into the story of what's really happening, so that we'll come back to it and start feeding much more information to all of this. Now, I want us to look at, all right, we said Ishmael, he had no right to inheritance, so this was the prime cause of the trouble or the strife between these two. Genesis chapter 21, verse 10 says, Genesis chapter 21, yes, and verse 10. It says here, "Wherefore she saith unto Abraham," this is speaking of Sarah, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac." So you understand that, remember, there is a great theological issue that is happening to this prime story that we are following through. So Ishmael had no right to inherit the land or the possessions of Abraham, because why? We have narrowed it down. It narrows down to being free or to being what? A slave, of which Ishmael was a slave, because the mother was a what? Was a slave. And he was not the son of the promise. Like we said earlier on, Ishmael represents Abraham's own works to providing the seed, for which God had promised that he is going to provide the seed on his own. He is going to provide the land on his own. And his works to provide this for himself, it does not suffice. And remember, I want us to remember this while we bring this to a close. I want us to remember that the whole issue at stake, going back to Genesis, this is a story about the coming of a seed who is going to crush the serpent's head, as promised earlier in Genesis chapter 3. So there was no way if we want to put it that way, there is no way in which Abraham could have made Ishmael this seed. Because remember, God is supposed to provide this seed on his own. It has to be a miraculous seed. It has to be out of a miracle. Like we see, Isaac is a son of a miracle. Where is the miracle? The miracle is, how can somebody have a child at that age, as Sarah was, in the 90s maybe. Most probably she had seen a menopause way, way back early in her life. So that makes it altogether a miracle. Just as it was a miracle through the coming of Christ, through the birth of by Mary, a virgin conceiving a child and bearing a child. It's a complete miracle. So this proves God providing the seed himself, just as it was supposed to be here on Isaac. So the issue here, it has everything to do with the seed. So you might trace the Ishmaelites to present-day Arabians. You might trace the sons of Isaac, or the descendants of Isaac, to present-day, so to speak, Jews. That's another story that we might cover later on in the future. But for now, I want us to understand where the A, B, C of the story is. Who is who in this? So I want us to realize the Jews we can trace by blood. Listen to this, by bloodline only. We can trace them to Isaac. Some of the Arabians, and okay, let's stick to the Arabians. We can trace them to Ishmael. But in reality, all these are the sons of Abraham. One represents the son by works, the other one represents a son by promise through faith. So we will base our study when we come back, now trying to feed more information to this whole thing. Galatians 4:29, the son was born according to the flesh, was at enmity with the son who was born according to the promise. They could not remain in the same household. One of them had to go. Like I said, this is an allegory, as Paul puts it in the book of Galatians. It's an allegory. So if it's an allegory, it means there is a greater story to it, more than just the life of Abraham. So that brings us back to our closing verse, John chapter 8, verse 56, where Jesus makes a disclaimer concerning Abraham, and he says, let me just get to it. Right, here we are. Verse 56, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it, and he was glad. So what Abraham saw in the promise of the seed, not seeds as of many, but seed as of one. He saw Christ, which is why even when God later on asks him to take the same child, Isaac, to go and sacrifice him at Mount Moriah, he was at ease to do that, because he had understood now that the God who had earlier on promised the seed, even if I lay this seed down in death, he is able to revive the seed, because God had what he had promised, and God had fulfilled. This time his faith was renewed, which is why he did it. He did it out of faith, pure faith. It was a hard decision to do or to take, but still with faith he managed. Hebrews 11 verse 6, it says, without faith it is impossible to please God, for he that comes must what? Must believe, he must have faith. So with Abraham, he saw the seed by faith and has understood that this is the coming of a seed to solve the sin problem. Ishmael, the theological aspect to which we are going to dig deeper into it, he represents Abraham's work to gain himself salvation, to gain himself acceptance before God, to which God says, I cannot accept. This is the work of your hands. This is the works of flesh. This is sinfulness. this is in the circumstance of everything that represents sin, cannot be accepted. So with this, I want us to close. And as you go on, if your mind is, prickled by this, I encourage you to dig deeper into the book of Galatians, into the book of Genesis, to study and to find out what all of this really means. Thank you. May God bless you, and may God continue to keep you safe from wherever you are.
We've shared together.